Look at it, a palace of gold, of crystal, of impossible wealth. 35 tons of gold pressed into ceilings, a chandelier so heavy it could crush a man beneath it. This is power. Or at least, that's what it wants you to believe, because when this palace was built, the empire that owned it was already bankrupt. This isn't a story about collapse. This is a story about foreclosure, about how a 600-year superpower lost control of its own economy, its own taxes, its own future, and became a tenant in its own house. So here's the question. How do you conquer an empire without firing a single shot? For centuries, the Ottoman Empire refused foreign debt, not because they couldn't borrow, but because they understood what it meant. Debt is dependency. But in 1854, everything changed. The Crimean War. The empire was outgunned, outmatched, fighting a modern war with a medieval treasury. And then came the offer. Britain and France would help, but not for free. For the first time in its history, the empire entered European financial markets. And that's where the trap was set. Because when the Ottomans borrowed millions, they didn't receive millions. Their bonds were sold at discounts, sometimes as low as 60%, meaning they owed 100% plus interest, but only received a fraction. From day one, they were already underwater. Once the first loan was taken, there was no going back. One loan became two, two became 15, and soon they weren't borrowing to build. They were borrowing to survive, to pay interest on previous loans. A financial spiral, a system where the empire's future was being sold to pay for its past. And while the debt grew, so did the illusion. Palaces, railways, European-style modernization, but underneath it all, the numbers didn't lie. By 1875, the empire's debt was nearly 10 times its annual income. Over half of its revenue was being consumed by interest payments alone. This wasn't modernization. This was liquidation. Then the system collapsed. The global economy crashed. Droughts hit the countryside. Floods destroyed harvests. The empire had a choice: feed its people or feed its creditors. For the first time, it chose its people, and on October 6, 1875, the Ottoman Empire defaulted, but the real explosion didn't happen in Istanbul. It happened in London. Investors panicked, savings were wiped out, and in that moment, the empire's fate was sealed. Because from that point forward, this wasn't just about money, it became about control. In 1881, the empire signed what looked like a rescue deal, but it wasn't rescue, it was surrender. The Ottoman Public Debt Administration, the OPDA, a foreign-controlled institution that took direct control of the empire's most valuable revenues: salt, tobacco, alcohol, silk, not just taxes, the foundations of daily life. At its peak, this debt office employed more people than the empire's own finance ministry. It had its own bureaucracy, its own enforcement, its own power. The empire still had a flag, still had a government. But economically, it was no longer sovereign. This wasn't just numbers, this was violence, because controlling revenue means controlling people. Farmers were forced to sell tobacco at low prices. Consumers paid high prices, so people resisted. They smuggled, and in response, the system created its own army. The Kolges, private paramilitary enforcers who hunted smugglers across the countryside. Thousands were killed, not in war, but in enforcement of debt. Meanwhile, taxes on ordinary citizens quadrupled. Collection wasn't negotiation, it was punishment. Beatings, humiliation, extraction. This is what default looks like when someone else controls your balance sheet. By 1908, a new generation had seen enough, the Young Turks. They didn't just want political reform, they wanted economic independence, because they understood something critical. You cannot be politically free if you are financially owned. They tried to balance the budget, reclaim revenue, break dependence on foreign control. But it was too late, because the system wasn't just external anymore, it was embedded. By the time World War I began, the empire was out of options. The treasury was empty. Soldiers were starving, and then Germany made an offer. Gold, immediate funding, but with a condition: join the war. And just like that, war became a financial transaction. The empire didn't choose a side, it chose a creditor. The Ottoman Empire collapsed, but its debt didn't. It was inherited, passed on to the Republic of Turkey, negotiated, restructured, divided across former territories, and for decades it was paid, until finally, May 25, 1954, exactly 100 years after the first loan, the final payment was made, a century to repay 2 decades of borrowing. This isn't history, this is a pattern. Today, nations across the world are facing rising debt burdens. In some cases, interest payments are consuming growing portions of national budgets. Infrastructure is being financed through foreign loans, strategic assets, tied to repayment terms, and when repayment becomes impossible, control begins to shift. Not always with armies, but with contracts, with conditions, with leverage. The mechanism hasn't changed, only the players have. The Ottoman Empire wasn't defeated on the battlefield. It was defeated on the balance sheet, because sovereignty is not just territory. It's not just military power. It's not even political control. Sovereignty is financial independence, because if you don't control your debt controls you. So now, look at the world today. Look at the numbers. Look at the deals being made behind closed doors. And ask yourself, are we watching history repeat itself, or are we just calling it something else this time? If this changed how you see power, then you already understand what most people miss. Hit the like button if this opened your perspective. Subscribe to World Power Files, because the real battles aren't always fought with weapons. Sometimes they're written in ledgers, and if you don't read them, you'll never see what's coming.